All right, API. What's an API? How do we API? So according to, what is it, Webster's? We have some nice definitions here. They're pretty much right. I guess this one is really the best one. So an API is really where some other system exposes places for your system to interact with it. And it does that on the assumption that it knows nothing about your system or that you're even going to make one at all. It just says, here's what I can do. I promise that I'll do it. Well, that's what the documentation would have you believe. And then you write a program that pokes it in those places in order to get it to do what you want it to do and work in tandem with your own whatever you're doing. Okay, so the one everybody always thinks of is the web, of course, but there's lots of APIs. So if we look here at, for example, Python dictionaries. So this list of various methods and all kinds of stuff, this is the dictionary for, the API for Python dictionaries. And you'll notice that it fits the definition perfectly. So this is a list of the various ways that you can interact with dictionaries, and it's completely independent of anything you wrote. This has always been the way it's done. So like, if you write a program and it uses a dictionary and calls the copy method, then this just tells you what that method will do. And it's up to you to make smart use of it or do something interesting or whatever. The API is really just a list of capabilities and ways to use those capabilities. So abandoning that now, as a sample here, I just made a little web app, basically, which serves up a collection of sounds, which you can see here. These are the sounds that I play when my tests fail on something that I'm working on. And if you look over here on the left at the code, let's embiggen it. Here we go. You can see, this is basically just a Python program. And you can see, however, that we have some of these weird decorators on some of our functions. And this is related to Flask, and Flask is for making web servers. But basically what we're doing is we're saying, when we access this URL on the server, we want to run this function. And we do that for many different URLs. And so you can see already a way where by exposing these URLs, which you can access from the browser here or from another Python program even. In fact, yeah, I'll do that at the end. We can not control the web server, but we can ask it to do things for us. So the first one that I'll show is just here. This is the simplest one. So this fart name, show fart, we'll do this one. So it just returns a string. And so this is what we get sent when we go to this URL. And you can see here, the server's name is Eleanor. Let me start it up actually. So here I'm starting up the program which is going to serve the web pages. If I don't do this, then the server's not on and this will fail. Say, oh, there's no server here. So I turn it back on. Oops. Right.
You lower the volume.
We could lower the volume if we were really boring. Okay, a little bit. Okay, so come on, stay with me. Okay, so fart name 5 here. You can see here this is basically the name of the fart. And what I did was just get the list of farts from this directory here, which is just a collection of farts that I have, as I'm sure everyone does. And it's just sorted alphabetically. So this is fart reverberating bathroom, which, here it is. Okay, so yeah, we can pick a new fart. Let's pick, I don't know, what's the first fart? Bean fart. That's probably a good fart. And so that's what this particular URL does. And if you look at the rest of the API here, so we have an endpoint called play/fart. And so if I go to that one, an endpoint is just a name for a URL that you can poke. It's like if you imagine all these URLs, you see how they kind of have, it's like a path name in a way. like /play, /fart, whatever. And the idea is that these are organized in such a way that makes sense. So like all of the things which play sounds I'm putting under the play path. I mean, in reality, you could just define completely random strings and have it do whatever you want. That's not very easy to work with, but you know, whatever. So by endpoint, I just mean like a full path that you can. It includes the whole little tree of stuff, and it takes you to some spot at the end of the path where it gives you an actual thing that you can poke. So if we don't go to an endpoint, so say for example I go to the root, which I don't have a route for, it says, hey, there's nothing here. Or if I go, if I go like partially, so let's do play fart, but not give it a full path, then it still says there's nothing here, because those don't actually exist anywhere. So one was bean fart. So if we do play bean fart here, you can see it's going to look at this URL that we accessed. It's going to match against this rule and say, okay, so this is what I have to do because the URL that you accessed matches this one. And then it's going to run this function with this as an argument. And this is special syntax that Flask gives you magically. But basically, it just takes the integer at the end of the URL and makes it the first argument here. And then once we hit this point, we're in normal Python land and we can do anything we want. So I call the play fart function, which is up here at the top, which just basically plays a fart using a media player on the computer. And then I call the show fart function, which returns this string with the name of the fart. And so if we do this, you can see that we've returned the string with the name of the fart, and we're playing the fart right now, in fact. And so, I mean, this is all happening on one computer, but you can see that this is happening from the browser, and we could do this from any other computer that was on the network and could access this web server. So this is basically what an API is, and you can expose whatever you want here and do whatever you want. And I guess for the sake of fun, I'll just expose another one just to show. So let's make a new one that does play, I don't know, another endpoint. So I'm making a new route that you can access fart first. So right now this one doesn't exist, just nothing here. Let's make a little. So this one doesn't take any arguments because I didn't use this like angle syntax anywhere. And all I'm going to do is call particular fart 1. And I want to return the value that I get from that. So when we hit that URL, once this restarts, it's going to look at this, it's going to run the play first fart function, which is then going to play or run the particular fart function, and so on. And you can see down here, maybe it's difficult to see, it's small probably. I don't know how to make this bigger. Can I make this bigger? Some random keys. There we go. Nice. Nice. Yeah, so you can see when I adjusted this, because we're in, it won't show up obviously till you restart the server. So we restart the server, and now when I run this guy, suddenly this thing exists. And so I could have picked a shorter fart, I guess. And so now it works, and we get the first fart and everything. And so you can see here that I just defined this myself. And this is basically just in yeah, so this is just regular HTTP, like any web page on the internet, and you can access it just as easily from a program. So we don't have to use a web browser. We could do, let's see, is this going to work? I don't know if this will work. Maybe you have to specify a port separately. I guess we'll see. Play fart first. Yes. I'm just guessing here. I don't have to look up the API for urllib2. Let's see, maybe? No, wrong. Okay, let's check. urllib2, URL open.
Is API like documentation?
URL data.
Or it just tells
maybe
you how to do something?
It's not just documentation. It implies, so like the documentation describes the API. So it implies really that you...
there's a way for you to do something?
Yeah. Like the API is the collection of various functions that you can call. And how you call them depends on the system that you're in and whatever. So here the way we call functions is by accessing the URLs. And the way we give it arguments is either embedded in the URL, or we can use various mechanisms that are used on the web, like post or get or anything else. So that worked.
Python's built-in functions, are they API?
Yeah, so that's the Python API, basically. So when you write your program, you're programming against like the Python standard library, let's say.
When you import something, are you importing something's API?
Yeah, I mean, you could say that, basically. So you are importing a module, and the module has an API. And that API is what you are using when you use the module.
Functions and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, API is kind of an abstract term, so it is, I guess it's really the best term to describe what we're talking about, though. So yeah, like when I imported here glob, the glob module, which it gives you a list of file names. So like when I was down here looking at this, basically it gives me this list. So I say go to this directory and give me everything that matches this glob. And the glob function is from the glob module, and so this is the API for using the glob module, I guess, is how you would say it. Similarly, what's that? What are we looking at?
I didn't really understand.
Okay, so the glob module here exposes various functions.
Yeah.
And together those functions make up the API of the glob module.
Okay.
And so this is basically me using the glob module.
Okay.
And so you could say I'm using the API of the glob module, or I've written this program against the API of, you know, Flask and subprocess and threading and whatever else. And over here, you know, when I did this little example, of course we can't get it back. Now I'm working in the interpreter, but this is basically a little program. And so you could say right now I'm programming against the API that I exposed over here.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, like
so,
you wrote.
Right.
The API.
But like this is an app, and if it wasn't me sitting here looking at it on my own computer, if this was on your computer, then it would be a web app just like every other web app. And so if I wanted to write a program to do it, to manipulate it some way or to do something with it, then I would be programming against that API. So lots of major services expose this, like if we look at like Twitter, I'm going to take a wild guess. No, API is a username. Okay. Maybe they expose it at the bottom here. Status, media, developers, advertise, info, directory, developers. Go. So here they talk about like their API. Let me make this bigger. API health, API status. So we can look at the status. So this is like the status of their systems. So these are various endpoints. And you can see here like this one's broken, apparently. But this is just like output for you to look at as a programmer to say like, is Twitter working properly or not? And so this, what it basically says is like, there's an endpoint here, which is version 1.1, and this is a common trick. So like if they want to change their API, they don't want to break everyone's programs, right? So what they do is they prefix it with a version number. So they say like, this is API version 1 and friends IDs, right? So this is probably going to send back to you the IDs of all the friends for the account that you logged in with or something. And if they want to change how this works in the future, they'll change that prefix to 2 or 3 or whatever. So this is an example of a very small subset of the Twitter API, I guess. And there are APIs. Yeah.
It's a program.
Yeah. In fact, have any. I don't even know my Twitter login. There's a nice library in Python that you can very easily make tweets from, and it just reaches out and hits the Twitter API. What's something else that has a nice API? There's a lot of things with nice APIs. There's an API for Facebook. There's an API for Google Maps. Google has a lot of stuff. Let's see. Google Maps API. So if you look here, so this is a huge API, in fact, because there's a lot of things that the Maps service can do. But if we just pick one, let's say, so this is like the API for interacting with Google's notion of places. So it probably gives you information about places, maybe nearby places, similar places. So if we click in introduction, maybe introducing the API, on some examples. All right, so here's an example. So this is an API call. And what's happening here basically is you are going to their servers, they're going to a particular address where they have servers listening, waiting for people to ask them questions, just like on my app. And by the URL here, they know what it is you're looking for. So you're looking for the Places API, and you want a search of nearby places, and these are parameters that we would have to look up what they mean. Okay, so you can ask for the response as XML or JSON, and these are two different ways to send data, basically. And the parameters are going to be parameters about the request, like which place are you asking about, what's your login information so that they can track that you're using their API, that kind of stuff. And they want to know that just so they know how much you're using it, whether or not they should be charging you money, that kind of stuff. In addition to, of course, what you're asking about. So, right, so that, yeah.
Do they money for using their API too much?
Yeah, depending on what it is. So it costs them money. Like Google Maps costs them money. So if I build a really sexy app and it's heavily dependent on Google Maps and it has 1 million users and they're pounding Google Maps all day long, Google is just paying for all of that bandwidth. And that's a lot of bandwidth. And so if I'm making money off of it, they want a cut. So then they expect me to pay them for every time that I use the API and so on. Most services work that way. Like I had a nice app for doing translations, and it was just it would just translate words and phrases, and I was using Google Translate for a while because it was free, and that API became really popular and surely was abused, and so they made it no longer free. So then you had to pay per, I don't know, 10,000 words or something that you translated. But it worked the same way. You would basically send a specific request. So you would send a URL that had some things encoded in it. It would have, like, for example, I don't know, like source word. Can I make, no, it doesn't get any bigger. You probably can't see it. Anyway, so you would pass it parameters, like the word that you want translated, the language you want translated from, the language you want translated to, and then it would respond to you with information about that. So it would either respond to you and say, we don't know, or it would say, here's what we think the translation is, and we're 60% confident, and whatever. So that was an example of using an API. And lots of services expose this kind of thing and let you do all kinds of stuff with them, basically. Right, so that's what APIs are. That's what they do. And again, it's almost always talked about in terms of the web, at least that's what it feels like now. But they refer to basically any programming interface, including any classes you've written yourself. So you want to write a nice API for your classes in your own program so that later when you have to use those classes, you can use them in a way that makes sense and is intuitive, and because you don't want to have to think about later on how you implemented it.
So my programs are API?
Your programs, so a program just runs. But if you have a part of that program which is meant to be used by other parts of the program, then in a sense that part of the program has an API, and the rest of the program is using that API. So if you write a class, let me save this, and let me start up, I don't know, what else is in here? Properties? Yeah, so okay, so here's my class from another example we made. And so this exposes an API as well. And this is a special container. So this class exposes like a collection of objects that you may want to use in your program if you need a collection of objects. And so the API it exposes is the add item function to add something to the collection, the remove item function to remove something from the collection, the length property to see how many items are in the collection, and then this weird ability to set the length by truncating it, which was just for example and doesn't really make any sense. So if this had not been a very good design, then this would be a difficult class to use. So, you know, if instead of add item we had to like, you know, let's say this API also required like, you know, magic number, I don't know. And then if magic number equals random dot random, well, dot rand range 10, let's say. So yeah, so now it only adds an item if you give it a number which matches whatever random number it happens to pick from 0 to 10. So now this becomes suddenly very hard to use. This is pretty poor as far as APIs go. We're going to do that now.